Welcome back to another episode of Life Unfiltered. Um, I'm your host, Caitlin, and I'm here with a very, very, very special guest, my husband. So Kanan's here with us. He's going to tell a little bit his story, kind of going alongside of my podcast episode, but his perspective, a male's perspective of it all. So first, I just want you to briefly, tell our listeners what it is that you do for a living.
All right. So, joined the Air Force right out of high school, about a semester or so after high school, back in 2013, and enlisted in the Air Force, and went through the pipeline to become a explosive ordnance disposal technician.
So, for those the average person who doesn't know what that is, what is the civilian way to explain what it is that you do?
So the equivalent to public safety that it would be called is the bomb squad. So the bomb squad on the civilian side handles a lot of improvised devices and suspect packages, whereas the military, at least the Air Force in this case, handles a lot of the military ordnance or bombs and grenades
Missiles.
and landmines and missiles and the aspect of aircraft and airfields.
So, in your job, what would you say is probably one of the most important factors between you and the other bomb squad, we'll say bomb squad guys, other EOD techs? What would you say is the most important?
So if we're talking about aspects here, it'd be communication. I would rank the highest out of everything, which translates over well into obviously what we're going to talk about a little bit during this podcast, and trust, really, just knowing that someone has experience, the mental aptitude, the physical fitness, the discipline, and all those whiz bang words as far as taking care of each other on a team. Yeah, in high stress environments, for sure.
So, to kind of go off of that, communication is something that is super strong in your career field. Would you also say that's something that you pride yourself on with continuing relationships outside of work because you are displaced being in the military?
Yeah, I've always prioritized that since I've joined. Most of the time when you're the one, and I understand the reasoning behind it, but when you're the one to move away from that home or that place that you'd call home and have most of your support system at, yeah, you're usually the one to initiate that contact and communication. So more so than not, I find myself reaching out, but there are, of course, the select few mutual friends and family members that you and I share that do a great job at maintaining that communication.
And I would arguably say that communication has probably been our strongest pillar in our relationship.
Absolutely.
Would you agree to that? I mean, from an early on, we've kind of relied on communication.
Yeah, and I don't know why I picked that. I mean, we were
21
when we first met, so I'd consider that fairly young to stumble upon your soulmate. But yeah, long distance relationship is how our relationship started. So I mean, what else can you do besides have great communication through text, through FaceTime, through just audio calling, leaving voicemails, whatever you could do depending on wherever we were. Yeah, Snapchat was big as well because you could get to it whenever you wanted. Not feel rushed about it, whereas text messages, it feels like you have to respond sometimes in such an immediate case. But yeah, communication.
Well, and even when we got engaged, when we were living in the same town at that point, no longer 2 hours apart, we had premarital counseling, and that was one of the aspects that that counselor really hit hard on. And there was something that she had told us. I don't know if you want to touch more on it about communication.
Yeah, so from her experience, from her studies that she had done for premarital counseling and following up on patients, if you could call us that at the time, the two biggest things that failed relationships would expose to her was lack of communication and failure to meet expectation. And most of the time, that communication would damper the failure to meet expectations, because if you don't vocalize those things and bring them to light and have your significant other aware of those things for you to work on, or to contradict if you needed to, then yeah, that's the biggest things.
That was the biggest, I guess, fault that she would find in relationships, right? So we've been, I would say, very blessed to have such a strong pillar of communication. And then once we got married, we obviously talked about having kids. That was something we had talked about even when we were dating, because we wanted to make sure we were marrying somebody, obviously, that wanted the same family goals as us. And we always discussed having kids, but it never, we always try to have it fit a timeline. But then it was, okay, now you're getting deployed. Okay, well, now you're home. Okay, well, now my school, I was going back to school for a little while, and I really wanted to focus on that. Okay, now you're getting deployed again, you know. It never really fit into our timeline. And so when you were deployed the second time, we had talked about, hey, you know, we've been married for a while. Like, maybe we do need to take this next step in this family. How was it when you came home, that mental shift of not having kids to wanting to try for kids?
I was very adamant on wanting to have, I think, a 6-month grace period from when I got home to start trying to have kids. And I wasn't budging on that at all. And I don't really remember why. I think just the significant life change and not knowing that what that would look like. So the unknown that comes with starting parenthood, with now looking back, I'm glad that I was more sporadic as far as when I got home and when we were rekindling the flames of obviously physically missing each other for 6 months or so. And we were able to be around each other, go on date nights and share weekends together and downtime.
Kind of date again.
That shortened that 6-month grace period to a couple months for sure.
Yeah. So then you were home. You got home in January of 21.
22.
22. So you get home January of 22, and I found out I was pregnant February of 22. So let's flash forward to that whole experience. So I remember it, and I talked about it just briefly on my episode of my perspective of telling you I was pregnant. But could you give a rendition of what you remember from me announcing that I was pregnant first time?
Sure can. So don't recall what I was doing that day as far as work goes, but I know it was a work day. I came home, typical 4:30-ish p.m. in the afternoon. I would have been the peak of winter in Kansas, so I'm sure I was
cold,
tired of the cold and the windy weather. And I remember coming home, and immediately routine sets in when I come home and try to relax when it's just you, me in the house, and immediately want to shower, take off all my dirty clothes, reset, get in some clean clothes, something comfy and warm for the remainder of the day, because we were probably staying inside. And I remember you stopped me for a second because I get in the zone of even tidying up when I get home and like I said, resetting.
Or just out of the shower, all of a sudden you want to tidy.
Yep, and just get to it and get everything done. That way I have nothing on my plate until dinner time and I can just rest. And I remember you stopped me and you told me to look on the bed, and there was a shirt laid out and a positive pregnancy test on the bed as well, and you were sitting at, I think, the head of the bed, and the shirt and the test was at the foot of the bed. So I could sit there and watch you and your reaction, of course, see me and my reaction of just jaw dropping and smiles. And of course, the questions then come across as, are you serious? Is this real? Is this happening right now? You know, the things that you think you wouldn't say, but of course, you can't control in that moment.
So you think in that first moment, after the "are you serious? There's no way" kind of wears off, did panic set in? Like, oh my God, I'm gonna have a kid? Did happiness set in? Like, what was that emotion after you were like, oh, okay, she's serious right now?
Yeah, it was happiness, because I had thought at the time that it was going to be much more difficult for us to get pregnant, just because of
my PCOS.
Yes, yeah, the diagnosis from what you had as a teenager, and of course seeing the differences in ovulation that you'd have and periods that you'd have as well. So happiness for sure, not so much panic, because you have quite some time to figure that out before the baby enters this life. But yeah, I don't know if we went out and celebrated that day, but of course the fun conversations and images of what you want the reveal to look like, and telling friends to look like, and all those fun pictures that you can look up and see how you want your nursery to be, and just all those thoughts
that
started.
Cloud 9, just riding that high.
Yeah, all those thoughts started racing by, and of course then the logistical things of what's the next steps as far as care goes. Who do we have to tell? What are the appointments look like, and at what week and month marks, and all that.
But before we even got into doctor's appointments, we had both decided, because it was early on in the year and we had a few holidays, that it was kind of perfect timing to tell families, at least. And we felt safe and comfortable telling families pretty early on.
Mm-hmm.
So can you share the story of us flying all the way down to Florida and surprising your side?
Yeah, so this was...
It was the weekend before.
Prompted by you getting pregnant, and did not tell a single soul that we were coming down to Florida. I believe I might have told friends because we wanted to get together with them, but we didn't tell them the reasoning until we went out to dinner. But it was the weekend before Easter, and I thought it'd be fun because I knew the family was getting together. My sisters and possibly my brother would drive in from their cities that they lived in Florida, which could be 3 hours up to 6 hours away, with my brother living in the Carolinas. And we took a very, very late flight that turned into even being an earlier morning when we finally arrived in Florida because of delays of weather. But finally arrived in Orlando at 12 midnight, 1 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
Tried to find a rental car. They were all taken. Tried to find a hotel for the night and get up early and find a rental car. All the hotels were booked nearby. Tried to find an Uber and taxis, and not a lot were responding, especially for the distance that we'd have to travel to get to my parents. And then finally found an Uber that was willing to take us the almost hour and a half car ride to my parents' house.
To be fair, I don't think he understood how far away it was.
No, but he accepted. Accepted the what do you call it? The job.
The job, yeah.
Yeah, so he knew single distance one way what it was going to be, and we tipped him very well because, of course, it was pretty late at night. Wanted to make sure he got home.
Yeah, I think we got the Uber around like 1:30 in the morning.
Yeah, it was late.
So it was awful timing.
Yeah, I remember getting there 3 o'clock maybe, and just wanting to shower and go right to sleep to get a few hours before the next day, where family was showing up early before Easter. And
yeah,
I remember getting home, and usually my parents, at least growing up as a kid, would have some way for us to enter the house that we only knew about. So if it would be the garage people door would be unlocked, or a key nearby, which the key wasn't even in the places that it was normally at.
Or that it should have been.
Or should have been, or a window being unlocked that we could sneak through to get into the house and just fall asleep and wake up in the morning and see the parents.
Yeah, because the plan wasn't to wake them.
Correct. It was just to sneak through the house, go to bed,
and
put a sign on the door saying that we were there and wake up with them. Yeah, but it turned into not being able to get in the house, and they don't have their phones next to them when they're sleeping. But we could hear the phones ringing in the kitchen from the garage. But of course, not being able to get inside, finally started ringing the doorbell, waking them up, and then being extremely dazed and confused why there is
maybe a little panic.
A blonde and a tall man in their doorway.
Yeah.
In the middle of the night.
Yeah, that was. I just remember them being so confused, and slightly maybe high alert as to why someone's banging on their door at 3 a.m. But then I remember they were like, "Okay, well, it's 3 a.m., so we're going to bed."
Correct.
Like, you're on your own. Good luck.
And thankfully, it was the weekend.
Yeah. So I remember we went to bed, and then I think it was Saturday. Was it Saturday? Everybody was coming over like the next day for Easter, right?
Yeah.
Your siblings were coming over.
Yep.
And so I remember them all coming over, and we had kind of a fun tradition that you guys had at Christmas, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we were like, "Oh, let's play into this. Mm-hmm. Let's have some fun. It's a holiday."
Yeah.
So what's that? Tell everybody about kind of that tradition and how that all went down.
It started, I think, with my grandparents on my dad's side. They would get everyone scratch off lottery tickets for fun, little $5-10 lottery tickets to see who would win cash and be able to turn it in at the nearest gas station, or their parents to turn it in. So we got all these scratch off tickets that, of course, didn't have any winnings to them, but of course sent a big message at the end once they scratched off their winnings.
Yeah, if they got like 5 certain symbols and you like scratch off your winning.
Yep, and it said, "We're having a baby," and a lot of people caught on immediately, like my mom and my dad and my older sister. Younger sister was kind of confused. She's like, "What do you mean we're having a baby? We already have a baby." And she was looking at her husband for a little
confirmation.
Yep, right? and she looked at us, or he looked at us and said, "No, who gave us the lottery cards, like the lottery tickets?" And then everything started setting in. So it was a really fun reaction from him.
I think your dad's reaction was the sweetest, though.
Yeah, I call him emotional, but I could probably count on
just a gummy bear,
a hand or two how many times he's gotten emotional. And it's at pivotal moments in my and my siblings' lives. Mm-hmm. And it's so authentic, I would describe it as. But of course, the tears would flow, and of course, seeing the head of the household that we all looked up to as kids and still do get emotional. Everyone else kind of trickles down and gets emotional as well.
It's a domino effect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was super fun. And then we went out, I think it was that night. Saturday we spent with your family, and then Saturday night we went out with your closest guy friends and their girlfriends.
Yep.
And I remember we went to some restaurant. I couldn't tell you what restaurant it was.
Yeah.
And we sat down, and everyone's ordering drinks. Well, 2 of the girlfriends weren't there yet. And so they were like, "Kayla, what drink are you having? What drink are you having?" And I said, "Oh, no, I'm going to wait until the other girls show up and, see what they're having." Because all the guys were having beer.
Mm-hmm.
"Well, what are you thinking?" And I just had to pick something on the menu. "Oh, this one sounds good." I remember trying to sell it so hard, and nobody was catching on. So I was dodging that bullet. And then finally the other girlfriend showed up. I believe it was just Nicole, actually, that we were waiting on. And so Nicole showed up. Yeah. They showed up. And so they're like, "All right, Caitlin, what are we having?" And I said, "Actually, I can't drink." And they were like, "Why can't you drink? Why would we come out at night if you're not going to drink?" And so I was like, "Well, it's because I'm pregnant."
Mm-hmm.
And then everybody got excited. And I remember everybody coming up and congratulating you. And it was just all smiles and
lots of immediately standing up and running over and hugging on us.
Yes.
Which was nice.
I thought that was really awesome to see, as kind of that third party sitting on the outside watching, like seeing all of that support for you, like just that pure excitement, like the cloud nine that you guys were riding and the huge smile that you had on your face. So like that was a really cool moment to kind of sit back and watch, even though I was totally involved.
Yeah, and it was supposed to be shock to them as well, like a shock to life, because I think I am the first one as far as our immediate friend group, or second actually, to have a kid. But as far as my closest buddies that night, the first in the group. So yeah, a big shock and realization that, wow, we're getting a little older and more responsible in life.
Yeah, that was, I think, kind of a reality to them too, of like, oh, we're not like these high school guys hanging out anymore, you know?
Nope.
But then we came back from Florida, and the following weekend was actual Easter. And so we did Easter at my parents' house. And at this point, my sister-in-law and older brother were expecting a baby. And I was 8 weeks in Florida, so I'd be 9 weeks on Easter. And she was 5 weeks ahead of me, I remember. So she was 14 weeks. And I had told her, actually, you were with me. I think we went over maybe and told them. Anyways, they had known. My brother and my sister-in-law had known. And so we had this idea to bring wine. Yeah,
really nice bottle of wine. One of your dad's favorites. We tailored a lot of the reveals that we were pregnant to our fathers, just them being the significant role models in our lives. And yeah, got him almost one of his favorites.
I think it's like his top 5 at least.
Absolutely. And was able to find a couple of them at the local liquor store. And you had found these sonogram stickers that were able to go over the labels of the wine bottles. But we
didn't use a sonogram because we hadn't had our appointment yet.
Yeah, it was like a generic sonogram or a picture of that or something. Like,
and it said, "Baby Brabbs coming soon or on the way."
Fall of 22 or something similar to that. Or don't open until fall of 22. Some fun message, and it being around Easter and him being the one usually that brings bottles of wine out and starts opening them and doing the honors of pouring glasses for the family, gave it to him to open up. And I was standing by you and your youngest brother. Megan was recording, pulled her phone out because she knew what to expect. And Chris and your mom were in the kitchen. We were all around the island, so everyone was able to witness it. But of course, your dad having the wit about him and seeing the message and being able to have his little moment before anyone else knew was really cool to see. And how he played it off to the rest of the family, knowing that he wanted to then have them share that message and surprise without directly telling them was really fun to see. And
because he was like, holy shit, like, really? Seriously?
Yeah, that's a nice.
And then he flipped over and he was like, this is just a really nice bottle of wine. Like, he totally played it off.
He did play into
it. Which was really cool.
So I think he then passed it on to your mom, and of course her jaw dropped, and more the same line of questions that come to your mind when you first discover something like this is just, are you serious?
Are you kidding me?
Are you kidding me? Really? So, and then Corbin, of course, being very confused, was then filled in on the message and everything and shown the bottle of wine. I think at that point Chris knew what was happening, or Megan had told him. So
yeah, that was, I mean, you don't get much more of a high than telling your friends and your closest group of people and then your family. Like, you just get so much joy out of that. And it's such a euphoric feeling, I think.
Yeah, and I think besides being in another city or state than family and being able to be in charge of how you go and surprise them, there's not many cases that you get in life to where you can surprise people. So I think this was one of the final ones we might have been in charge of to then tell family members we were expecting without them knowing and being able to hide that secret for so long.
Yeah. So then go forward a couple more weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And we finally get a first doctor's appointment because I didn't know this, but you wait until you're around the 11, 12, 13-ish window. Just that way they can pick it up on a sonogram. Yeah. I didn't know that. I thought you went in early, kind of like when we first found out. We were like, okay, what do doctor's appointments look like?
You'd had to go into base to get a referral first and get blood drawn and a few other things. So they could confirm that you were pregnant.
Yeah. And so then the first appointment is also a sonogram. And so when we got to my OB at that point, we got there. What was, because you talked about this in the very beginning of expectations. Mm-hmm. When we got to that first sonogram, what was that expectation for you? What kind of were you anticipating when we showed up?
I knew I was going to feel a lot of emotion. I didn't know. I knew there was going to be a lot of happiness and joy and fun things to look forward to going through there or going from that point forward. And I knew that this was going to be the first visual cue that we did have a successful pregnancy. And going forward, we're expecting, of course, a baby in our lives, our baby. And being able to see it on a screen and see a heartbeat and just holding your hand through the process, I think that's what I mainly expected. But sometimes I just go in to with a blank canvas, an experience like that. So
then, and I talked about this in my first episode, is we went in and at first she was asking very routine questions, the sonographer. Mm-hmm. Is this your first pregnancy? How far along should you be? All of those questions.
Just trying to get a gauge of the patient, I think.
And then also kind of know what to expect when she's looking, right? So I should have been like 11 and a half weeks or something. Mm-hmm. So that way she could say, okay, yeah, your baby's kind of growing on track. It's not growing on track. It's ahead, all of those things. So she could gauge that. Was there any point during the beginning of that appointment when the sonogram starts, because I don't know what to look for. I know you don't know what we're looking for either because it's our first time. And so was there any point that you went, something's just off, that gut feeling or that instinctual feeling of, I don't know, like this isn't what I expected?
Mm-hmm. Everything in the beginning seemed very routine. And I'd understand if you're working in that career field, you ask those open-ended questions to get the patients talking, to get them comfortable. And because you're pulling information too, like you said, about progress and measuring the baby and seeing how far along. But I think as time went on, and I knew the next step was ultimately finding a heartbeat. And just from seeing videos on social media and people sharing their stories and things that we had just gotten bits and pieces of over time, we knew there was going to be a point where we could see the heartbeat and there was going to be that fun moment where we started getting pictures printed out of it, and not really that relief because we weren't expecting any bad news at that time. Yeah. But I think as time went on and it got more silent in that room, and then complications just from the external sonogram happening and her having to change a couple methods and still not being able to find a heartbeat, was then when thoughts started getting more worrisome.
Yeah, and her delivery, I'm going to flat out say, was probably the worst delivery of that news.
Yeah, that could have been done a lot better. I think it was blunt and cold, which I'm not surprised because you could definitely get numb in their career fields. Like I do with some of the stresses I encounter as well. But yeah, I think reading the patient and knowing it was our first time the delivery could have been a lot softer.
I 1000% agree on that. Mm-hmm. But I will say, after we had discovered and after she had just told us, like, your baby doesn't have a heartbeat, it died. Mm-hmm. When we went back into the actual, like, exam room,
Patients' waiting rooms.
Yeah, essentially. And that PA came in. She was the sweetest human. Um, she walked us through, these are some options you have. And I go into that on my other episode, so I won't dig into that now. But once she had gone through all the options, I had my mind made, like, yeah, this is the route I want to go. Was there any regret in the decision that, because you kind of said, this is kind of your choice. This is what I think would be best. But at the end of the day, you really left that up to me, which is something that, looking back, was a really great way to support me. Do you regret choosing the surgical route over any of the other options we were given?
I don't think so. Going back to this being our first sonogram and the visual aid that it was going to give us, you and I rely heavily on those visual cues, not so much like auditory or tactile learners, but being able to see things and perceive them as reality. So I think the other two options of potentially collecting the fetus, because we hadn't talked about whether we wanted genetic testing done on biopsies, but instead you being able to go under and not having any of those traumatic memories or visual indicators of trauma that you would have to go through collecting your own fetus and it being at a random, undetermined point. I don't think we would have enjoyed any of that. There are stronger people out there in this case that might be able to do that or disassociate.
Yeah, that was
and I'd
not
call
us.
them stronger because it's not for us. I knew it wasn't for me, and I didn't want you to go through that by yourself.
Yeah.
If anything, I was going to want to be there if you were to choose that route.
Yeah.
Which I knew that was going to be hard, but if you wanted to go a more natural way, then I was on board with that. But of course, I think my vote, if I had to decide if I was you, would definitely be more of a surgical route.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, up until this point, before we get in the car to go home, you were, I would say, fairly composed. There was a couple times because I was an emotional wreck because it crushed me. You go from this ultimate high to your worst nightmare happening in a matter of seconds. And so I remember you being very composed during that. But where were you? What would you say where you were mentally during finding out, during the car ride home, up until we got home? How did you process all of that?
Yeah, in public, and just immediately the shock and the freeze that I was experiencing from the news, and knowing that there was decisions that didn't have to be made right away, but I think we wanted to put those steps in motion because whether that was a positive outcome and there was going to be a step in motion to get more appointments, or in this case, a negative result, and steps ultimately having to be put in motion as far as informing the OB and the staff what our choices forward were going to be. I think I composed myself really well just based off of knowing when stress is overwhelming and being able to still dial in at that moment.
Yeah.
And I'll go off on a tangent telling a funny story about a time we left the grocery store and you left your purse inside of where a baby would sit and pushed it into
cart carousels.
Yeah, the cart carousels, and we made it almost all the way home before realizing it. And how frantic you became, and how maybe over the speed limit I drove, but still with a extremely composed, neutral face.
I definitely feed off of how your reaction is, and I think you knew that going forward in this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I still got emotional. I still shed some tears and got choked up and quivery lips.
Yeah.
Tightness in the chest. I still remember all those feelings to this day, but yeah, wanting knowing that you are going to physically be put through something that I won't be able to understand, and emotionally the connection that you have already had, mm-hmm. and hormonally the connection you have already had with this baby, mm-hmm. and the differences that it's going to change when it's essentially torn out of you is something I won't ever be able to understand. Yeah. So just having that strength throughout this was something I knew I had to do going forward. And it was, I would say it's natural. So I didn't have to be preached this or taught this, but just having that generic protective mentality over you and knowing how to enact that, I think helped a lot. Of course, the drive home, and getting home and having a moment or two away from you definitely changed some things, which I know we're about to talk about.
I remember the car ride, in reality, I think was 7 minutes, 6 minutes.
Not long at all.
Was not, minute-wise, was not a long drive. But I remember that being an incredibly long, silent, I say silent, it was a very emotional, at least I know I was crying, and you would get worked up and then compose yourself again because, like we had just talked about, like you want to uphold that maybe safety net for me of like, I'm strong, I can be there for you.
And I was driving as well, so of course that always plays a big role into focusing on the road. But at stoplights and stop signs and everything else, those emotions would definitely.
I don't think it really maybe hit you until we got home.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Until I was in my place of comfort and safety.
Yeah.
As well.
Because once we got home, I came inside, and then we walked in through the garage, and like you hung out in the kitchen and stayed there, and I walked off.
Yeah, you had walked off, probably getting the comfy clothes or
something.
Try to maintain some sort of routine getting into the house instead of dawning on it too much in the beginning. Mm-hmm. Try to get into the house and get your feet moving. Yeah, I had told you to keep going. I stopped in the kitchen to read a couple of text messages from really good friends of mine, bosses of mine, because of course things started to move forward on that aspect too, because I know we both reached out to our bosses and told them almost immediately when we were in the waiting room waiting for the PA, right?
Yep.
Right, we had some time to tell people and to catch them up to speed as far as us not being at work.
Yeah, because that appointment was in the morning. Mm-hmm. And I remember telling my boss, like, hey, I'm not coming back. And as a teacher, like,
yeah,
you don't do that. But my boss said, you're done. We'll see you Monday. Don't worry about it. But your boss, who's also just a really good friend, it's weird for me to say your boss, just because he's just such a genuine person. Mm-hmm. Sent you a really awesome response.
Yeah, he's been privy. I don't know if privy is the right word. He's been through loss or family members of loss or coworkers that he knows the steps in place as far as the military side of things. Mm-hmm. The resources available and a few of the balls that can be rolling on that side of the coin as far as what we can take advantage of and what's available to us. So assured me that those things were in place, assured me that a couple of people in the chain of command who needed to know knew. Mm-hmm. And I think he was going to tell the flight about the news so that everyone was prepared for me to obviously be in a different emotional state when coming into the shop, because the banter and everything's always there, and the people who weren't there might not have been in on the loop as far as certain questions you shouldn't ask after, or shouldn't ask as far as when people go through loss. You want me to get into it, what he said specifically?
Sure.
Yeah. So he had told me to take a knee and assured me that everything was okay at work and that I didn't have to worry, which was great coming from such a strong EOD shop and so many people that I had made great friendships with and considered them family and brothers and sisters. But he told me to take a knee, and I think that for some reason hit home so much because growing up playing football and someone gets injured, you take a knee until they get up, until they start waving their hand, give a thumbs up, or the ambulance comes and takes them away. So it can be a very unknown situation until you get up off that knee. I didn't know how long I was going to be gone for. And of course, once you finally exited the room and I read that text, I mean, I think I silent cried behind where the kitchen cabinets were and the living room and everything else for a couple minutes until you came back and threw your arms around me and held me, which was really good.
Yeah,
it was needed.
I think that was when it hit me of, this is gonna suck.
Yeah.
You know, like, same. It doesn't really, like, it. You hear, you know, you've miscarried, all these things. Hey, these are your options. But I think in that moment, once I finally was in, like you said, your place of comfort, your safety area, the place that your sanctuary, so to speak. Mm-hmm. And I saw you break down, that's when I went, oh yeah, this is gonna suck. And I think that's when reality kind of just took over for both of us.
Yep, that's when we had an hour or so to process, and it became very real.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I remember my parents came over, and, you know, and they just asked, are you okay? You know, those typical grief follow-up questions, and they didn't know what to do. You could tell that they wanted to be there, they wanted sports, but they didn't know how. Mm-hmm. And later, my best friend Peyton came over that evening when she got off all of her residency stuff.
She had sent you a voicemail as well, because we had sent out texts to family when we got home and took a few minutes to digest everything as well. Yeah. Just asking for some time, asking for grace and prayers, and give us a little bit of time to process. Be able to talk on the phone, which, I remember a conversation with my mom as well. Went kind of similar to the conversation that Peyton and you had in the voicemail. She said, people could feel it, you know? They were pretty invested and just so happy for us. So you could tell they were hurt well.
Yeah, that was it was hard to almost disappoint everybody else that was cheering so hard for us.
Yeah, or just know, like, the ripple effect that it can have. Yeah. So much joy can be not taken away, right? But
in that case, absolutely, it was stripped from us. And
yeah, but there's a whole spiritual side of things that we'll get into in another podcast, as far as reasonings or how we finally managed to get past the grief stages and everything.
Yeah. So, we found out, I think it was a Wednesday. By the time we called the PA back and we said, hey, we'd like to do the surgical route, the OB that I originally had was going on vacation. So she was unable to do it. So I called my best friend Peyton. I said, hey, you know, who would you trust? So she gave me a referral to a different OB. So we got a new OB set up, and then I asked for Peyton to be the resident on the case, which was
a godsend.
That was such a relief for both of us. But going to surgery day, I talked about on my podcast my experience with surgery day. But once they pull me out and you're left, and they say, hey, you need to go sit in the waiting room.
Mm-hmm.
What was that? Because now your wife and miscarried baby are going under, and you're just told to sit and wait. So how were you processing that, and emotionally, where were you at with all of that?
It was kind of a contradiction of emotions, because on one side I wasn't familiar with surgery and people going under. No one I knew had really gone under for any minor or major operations before. So just the unknown once again, and not knowing what could go wrong in that instance, or the probability or likelihood of things going wrong. So that's always on the forefront of the mind, just wanting to know that your loved one is extremely safe and in the right hands. And in this case it was, which was the contradiction of those negative thoughts, which was Peyton's in the room, Peyton's right there, she's going to tell me absolutely everything, which is really amazing, and what I'm grateful for as well. And I saw her when she arrived, because you were already taken back. I think I saw you one more time before then they were taking you to the operating room. So I got to say, I love you, just hugging you, making sure you were okay, making sure you still wanted to go forward with it, because at any point you could have
changed my mind.
Changed your mind. And then sit in the waiting room, and it was supposed to be about a 30-minute operation. I think they said it took about 45 or 50, which I wasn't too worried about. Just a lot of thoughts and digesting, and processing, going through it again.
And Peyton was the one that came out when I was done.
Yep,
right?
Yep. She gave me the lowdown, of course. I think between her and Burford, of course, she was the one that volunteered to come and give me an update. So told me a couple things going forward, right? Them prepping you for a higher probability to get pregnant the next time, and what that would look like, and of course just resetting you and everything you needed as far as trying to.
Yeah, and so then she also told you they sent meds, right?
Yeah, so they had sent a lab order for prescriptions, for I'm not quite sure what, right? Probably something to help clot, because you'd gone under, something to help with
probably anti-infection,
all the side effects with
things
it.
Like that.
Yep. To base, which I don't remember the cause of why they didn't send it to a Walgreens, but we had to go to base for it. So I'll just jump right into that. Peyton assured me you were okay, gave me an update, printed out lab orders, also said that they had sent it to base, which was where the pharmacy was. It was about 5 minutes from where we lived. And next thing you know, Peyton's like, all right, go get the truck. We're going to take her out or wheel her out to you, and I'll help you get her in the truck and send you on the way. Because immediately, of course, they have more operations and things that they have to do if they're on call.
Because I was at a surgery center. I wasn't at the actual hospital, which was kind of nice.
Yep.
And I remember, I have no idea how I got dressed. I don't remember any of that. I remember being in a wheelchair, and I remember seeing the door. I remember you and Peyton helping me into the truck.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of it. But that's kind of the downside of anesthesia, is you don't really remember. It's kind of like a puzzle with a whole bunch of missing pieces. And I don't remember getting to base. And so what was that ride like with half anesthesia wife?
Yeah. It's about 30 minutes, and probably for the first 10 or so, you were coherent-ish, eyes closed, but still having those genuine thoughts, because of course you're not fully conscious. You're kind of loopy, is what we described you as being. But a lot of self-guilt and blame coming out of your mouth. And in this case, it was, I'm sorry I killed my baby. It's my fault. I'm sorry I lost it. All these me and I type scenarios, which I tried to deter in the moment, right? And the hand holding, the crying, the more tears shed all the way to base, or at least for the most part until finally you were able to just rest. And I had told you to recline in the truck and try to sleep because you were fighting it. You were fighting to try to stay awake and realize what had happened. I think you knew. You just weren't able to process it fully.
Yeah.
So by the time we got on the base, checked us through the gate, of course, with a sleeping wife, which was probably confusing at,
probably slightly concerned.
10 a.m. or so. I had to leave you in the truck running, but had your phone next to you, so if you woke up, you could at least grab it and text me. But I had to go inside and fill prescriptions, so went inside with the lab order. They hadn't gotten it yet, so they still had a little bit of time before they processed it, and I asked them, put a rush order on it because my wife's in the truck, like we just got out of surgery. So got a few weird looks there that you're in the truck unsupervised, but had to do what I had to do. And then asked if you had had a DNC, which I think we talked about this already, and it was a little bit of, she wasn't giving me any visual cues that she was judging, but they had to ask the question, I think, for legal reasons as far as maybe what they were prescribing. Because they had known you were pregnant, said on your file you were pregnant, and that was probably why. So news hadn't gotten back, of course, to the base yet, because we were being seen off base for everything medically.
Yeah, they didn't have an OB because the base was so small.
Yeah, it was just a clinic at that point. It wasn't a hospital. So got your medicine, or got it filled, and was still waiting to receive it. And by that point, I was just hoping you wouldn't wake up and be by yourself in the truck, which unfortunately you did. And I think you had told me to, of course, wake up to crying, and confusion is where you were. Yeah. And finally texting me. And
you fall asleep in a hospital, and then you wake up not really conscious, get put in a truck, and then drive 30 minutes south to wake up and be conscious, and all you see are tan buildings and you're in the middle of a parking lot.
Yep.
It's one of those things where you're like, wait, time out. How did I get here? But there's only one place in Wichita that has all tan buildings, so it's pretty quick to come to okay, I'm on base. Mm-hmm. Why am I on base?
And it was raining. I remember the cleanse of the rain when I was walking through the parking lot. Just another good omen in this case that I'm familiar with, growing up in Florida, being a kid running out in the rain.
Yeah.
Just another sign from the world, right, that it was going to be okay.
Yeah.
And that we were putting the final stamp of that phase of the pregnancy to rest, which felt really good, as painful as it was. And those thoughts still come up to this day on a drive, or a specific song comes on the radio, or we have talks like this, which get fewer and farther between, but still hurt the same. And I described this to someone else the other day. It's the pain never gets easier. It's just less often.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Well, and I wouldn't even say in that moment it was like, okay, we're good, we've got closure, this cleanse is like the rain cleanse.
Yeah, it's not immediate.
Because after that, we ended up, the resources that John gave us, we ended up taking. And so we ended up doing a therapy just because there's not a book, nobody knows how to coach you through a miscarriage. There's not a pamphlet, there's nothing that really walks you through it. No. And so we went to therapy for a few weeks together at least. But did you feel as if you went to therapy because I was going to therapy? Did you go to therapy because you were there to support me? Was it there for you? Because I went longer than you. I had more sessions following you stopping going.
Yeah. I'd always viewed myself as the beacon of strength and foundation that I needed to have for our family. So I knew going forward that a nonverbal expectation for myself, for you, was to be someone you could lean on. So I knew I had to work through this process a little quicker, or wanted to, because of everything that you were putting your body and your mind and hormonally through. So it was beneficial in the beginning for both of us. A lot of good talking points, and of course, accountability for us to go and talk about the things that we didn't necessarily want to talk about on specific days. But yeah, as things with my job get in the way and jump into place, of course, those sessions became fewer for me. I felt like I was progressing quicker through grief, which I thought it would be at the same pace for you and I, because we were always synchronized, but in this case it wasn't. So you were able to just go by yourself for a few more of those sessions through therapy and be guided, is the word I like to use, right? Because there's no rule book. It is a guidebook as far as suggestions you get from people, but it's really just making your own path of healing and seeing what works for you and what doesn't, and try to analyze as much as you can when you're not too emotional.
Absolutely. And then, did you feel outside of therapy? Because Janet I thought she was really good at listening to us. But outside of that, did you feel like you had support and you had somebody that, or people, more than one person even, that was there for you, that supported you through that?
Yeah, a ton of people came forward and shared their mutual feelings or experiences, no matter the timeline, no matter
males or males and females.
Males specifically for me. Females more so if they were closer to me than you would ask for your contact, right? Because it's more natural to talk with someone of your own gender, and of course, in my case, the guys that I work with, so they can relate a whole lot more with me than they can with you. But a ton of support in the beginning, and once again, because I think I just progressed a little quicker. Through that grief and understanding and realization, that it dwindled off quicker and support wise for me, because they knew, like, okay, he was on it. He's got it figured out. So
moving forward, if this were to happen to us again, if this were to happen to a family member, a friend, a coworker, anybody that we know, what advice would you give them, or guidance to use that? What would that, maybe one or two things that you were like, wow, this was something that really helped me, whether that's a word or a phrase or something, or even going to therapy, what would that be to the males? Because I feel like females get a lot of support. So moving forward for males, what advice would you give them if they were going through this?
I don't know a perfect way to phrase it, but just talking about it definitely helped us a whole lot, whether that was solicited or not, which was always great, because things that were sporadic tended to make the biggest impact with us. The solicited stuff being like therapy and resources that you can use out there, which are always beneficial, but just talking about it to where you're breaking down those barriers and those walls that you're putting up. And of course, not only with your significant other, because you need to have other perspectives and hopefully people in your life that can be that sounding board to you, or vice versa, I think makes you not feel alone. And I think that's the key word, is you're not alone in any of these situations. You guys have already covered quite a few in your podcast moving forward, and you have quite the lineup from here on out of different situations that people will hopefully be able to relate to, or be prepared for, I think, as well, which helps a lot. So just the more you talk to people, well, the less you'll feel alone, and the more that they can help you and assist you through that process, and that just binds you even closer to those people as well.
1,000% I agree. Well, I appreciate you coming on and being vulnerable, because this is not something that's ever really shared. And so being a male in a, I would say, very high testosterone job, just military in general, like, you don't really get the same response probably, or put off the same response that people expect. And so being able to come on here and, show your vulnerabilities is very moving. And so I really appreciate it. And I hope somebody else out there also hears this and goes, it's okay not to be okay sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. As seen tonight, I got emotional, and the candle just seems to burn a little bit quicker for the males in this situation that we went through. So, though it's the same size, right?
Yeah.
Candle, it definitely burns a little quicker. So
it's a quick fuse.
It's been hard, but it's been moving, and it's of course grown us to be closer together. And talking about it has helped a ton.
Yeah. So, love you.
Love you.
Thank you. If you or somebody you know is going through a loss or is a male, I'm not saying Kaanen's an expert. Obviously, we've only been through this one time, and everybody's experience is totally different. If this even were to happen to us again, it could be a complete different experience for both of us. And so if you're needing somebody to reach out to, call, text, message, whatever, your friends, they're not going to have the probably perfect response, but they're going to be there, as we've learned. If you don't have anybody, you're more than welcome to reach out to me. If you're a male and you just need some guidance and you want male advice, I'm sure Kaanen wouldn't mind if you just sent him a message. He's not the greatest on Instagram, but he'll get back to you eventually.
He'll forward all that stuff to me. I'll get to it immediately.
So just know you're not alone. People do go through this. There aren't a lot of male resources, but that's what this podcast is about. We're trying to break those barriers. We're trying to, talk about the things that aren't talked about. And,
trying to connect.
Yeah. So, thank you for listening. I know this was a long one, but it's a good one. Tune in a couple weeks when we have another one out.